We begin as President Obama becomes the first president in U.S. history to make 2 visits to India. That's where the president and first lady have just wrapped up their 3-day visit. Obama also became the first U.S. president to be the chief guest at India's Republic Day parade, which took place on Monday. But it is what China is saying to India about that visit that's grabbing attention. The Chinese telling India to avoid a, quote, zero-sum trap being set by Washington and its allies. The Chinese seem to believe that the U.S. is singling out, even pressuring India to become a key ally in order to slow China's rise. That Republic Day parade became an opportunity for China's president to express China's willingness to, quote, make concerted efforts with India to lift their strategic cooperative partnership oriented to peace and prosperity to a higher level, end quote. So what does this back and forth over India really mean? For Insight, I was joined earlier by journalist, professor, and former Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for Economic Policy under Ronald Reagan, Paul Craig Roberts. And I began by asking him if, in fact, the United States is working to drive a wedge between Beijing and New Delhi.
Washington is very disturbed about the formation of BRICS. They're disturbed about the recent trade deal made between Putin and India. And they certainly don't want India pulled into that Chinese-Russian alliance. So yes, this is an effort to disturb the relationships between India, China, and Russia.
It's fairly interesting. You know, President Nixon, as you know, was the first U.S. president to visit the People's Republic of China. Nixon and Kissinger did not like India at all. Now, listen, you brought this up a minute ago. We've heard very little about India until recently, but we see the U.S. kind of fighting this uphill battle because India is part of that BRICS alliance: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. How significant is BRICS right now in terms of a threat to kind of the U.S. place on the world scene?
Well, the populations and the land mass of those areas is enormous. And certainly China has taken over the lead of economic development from all other countries. And India has had a good bit of development in professional tradable skills. And so it does have the potential of abandoning the use of the dollar, of leaving the Western financial mechanisms and clearing mechanisms. And this then is a direct threat to the exchange value of the dollar. So I think it does have the potential of forming a kind of trade relationship that undermines the ability of the United States to control all the outcomes. You know, Washington is very control-oriented, and it has a lot of control because of the collapse of the Soviet Union, because of the tendency of the European countries to follow Washington's lead. And so it sees the BRICS as a real challenge to Washington's ability to control outcomes. And so it will do whatever it can to break it up.
The word control that you're using there is an interesting word. I think it's a very accurate word, simply because for so many decades, the United States has kind of strong-armed a lot of these other nations, and that includes through a variety of means, including trade, including our willingness to import goods or to allow cheaper goods to be sold here, as well as when we talk about, you know, some of these issues specific to emerging nations like India and like China, this idea of controlling foreign aid that goes out. BRICS is in direct contrast to that, creating its own system of trade, as you talked about, and financial system for helping smaller developing nations so that they're not reliant on the United States. Are we watching U.S. control of a lot of these issues kind of falling through our fingers at this point?
Well, that's the potential. It's beginning to happen because Washington is picking on Russia, is picking on China. And this is a mistake because they're very large and powerful countries. And so it does show that Washington is worried that it is going to see the world develop into more than a unipolar place where Washington calls all the shots. It's getting harder and harder for Washington to do that. And I think the kind of hegemonic policies that it's currently applying to Russia, that warns all the other countries that the same thing can happen to us. We've got to get out of that American system and have one of our own so that we are not subject to this economic bullying. So really what Washington is doing by trying to stop the rise of the BRICS, it's actually encouraging them to hurry up and go forward faster.
It starts to create those unintended consequences. I want to just take you, as my last question here, a little bit off where we've been, but I think you're making some points that are alluding pretty strongly to it. The Chinese have been working deals with a number of different countries in exchange for oil that has cut the dollar out. Their latest one is a new deal with Iran to do exactly that. But the Chinese have worked these kinds of trade deals, especially when we talk about oil, with global partners all over the globe, including strongly in South America and in Africa. What does this say about China cutting the U.S. dollar out of its place as the world's reserve currency? How active has China been, and will they continue to be to make sure that happens?
Well, the basis of American power is the dollar as world reserve currency, because it means the United States can pay its bills by printing money. And so it faces no financial constraint. And that's really the basis of American power. So China can see that the United States really does not like the rise of other countries. And it knows that China is also in the crosshairs, not just Russia. And as China is very well positioned economically, it's taking steps to remove some of the power the United States has to try to control or intimidate China. So yes, they are purposely and consciously trying to create a trade system in which the role of the dollar disappears, because that means the demand for the dollar falls, and as the demand for the dollar falls, the value of the currency falls, and that helps accelerate the loss of the role of world reserve currency. So the Chinese are smart. They are responding to what they see as a threat from Washington, a military threat, with these kinds of changes in the economic situation.
Well, it seems those changes are coming, and they're coming fast. I believe this is the largest story, biggest story mainstream media in this country does not cover, critically important for our future as a nation. Journalist, professor, and former Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for Economic Policy under Ronald Reagan, Paul Craig Roberts, thanks so much for your insight.